Miss Alice Romano, you have exactly 48 hours to settle your father's debt or you'll lose the coffee shop. The lawyer's words echoed through the small apartment like thunder on a sunny day. Alice nearly dropped the coffee mug she was holding with trembling hands, her hazel eyes wide with disbelief. 48 hours, she repeated, her voice coming out as a whisper. But I thought we had more time. The man in the gray suit adjusted his glasses with the air of someone who had delivered this news dozens of times before. Your father signed a very specific agreement, Miss Romano. The deadline is Friday at 6 p.m., $350,000. Alice's world collapsed. $350,000. She could barely afford the rent on the tiny apartment where she'd been living since her father was hospitalized. Beans and Dreams, the small coffee shop that had been the pride and livelihood of the Romano family for 3 generations, would be lost forever. Is there any way to negotiate? She asked, swallowing the lump in her throat. I'm sorry, but no. The lawyer closed his briefcase and stood up. Unless you can come up with the full amount by Friday. When the door closed, Alice collapsed onto the worn sofa and let the tears flow freely. 3 generations of history, of secret recipes, of customers who had become family. Everything would be lost because of the medical debts her father had accumulated trying to save his wife, Alice's mother, from a cancer that, in the end, took her anyway. Her phone rang, interrupting her moment of despair. Alice, are you okay? Your voice sounded strange when you called earlier. It was Penelope, her best friend since college. Penny, I don't know what to do. Alice told her everything between sobs. Wait, $350,000? Alice, you know if I had that money. I know, Penny, I know. Alice sighed. Maybe it's time to accept that some battles can't be won. Don't say that. There has to be a way. What about a loan? With what collateral? My credit is already ruined because of the hospital bills. A silence followed, broken only by Alice's sniffles. Alice, I have a crazy idea. Penny, if you're going to suggest I sell a kidney, don't be dramatic. Remember my job at Blackstone Corporation? Alice frowned. Penelope worked as an executive assistant at one of the city's largest investment firms. I remember. Well, there's a rumor circulating around the office about the CEO. What about him? John Blackstone needs a wife. Alice almost laughed. Penny, did you hit your head? No, listen, he's being pressured by the board to get married. Image issue, stability, those corporate things. And he hates that pressure. Yesterday I heard him talking to his lawyer about hiring someone for a marriage of convenience. You're suggesting that you apply for the position of temporary wife to the richest man in the city. Alice was silent for so long that Penny asked if she was still on the line. Alice? Penny, this is insane. It's an opportunity. From what I heard, he's willing to pay very well. Very well indeed. I don't even know what he looks like. Gorgeous, worth mentioning. And he's not an ogre, Alice, he's just intense. Alice bit her lip. The idea was absurd, impossible, completely out of the question, but it was also the only thing remotely close to a solution that had appeared in front of her. How would I do this? It's not like I can knock on his door and say, "Hi, I heard you need a fake wife." Leave it to me. I can arrange for you to have an accidental meeting with him tomorrow. Penny! Alice, what do you have to lose? That question echoed in Alice's mind after they hung up. What did she have to lose? Her dignity? It was already being questioned. Her pride? It was already trampled. The coffee shop? She was going to lose it anyway. That night, she barely slept. She kept imagining what it would be like to meet the mysterious John Blackstone. Would he really be capable of paying $350,000 for a fake marriage? And more importantly, would she be capable of pretending to love a stranger? The next morning, the phone rang early. Alice, put on your best outfit and go to Central Cafe at 10 a.m. He always has coffee there on Wednesdays. Penny, I can't just... You can and you will. Life is giving you a chance, Alice. Take it. At 9:45 a.m., Alice was standing in front of Central Cafe, her hands sweating inside her winter gloves. She had chosen a simple but elegant navy blue dress, the only one she owned that wasn't faded or flawed. "You can do this," she murmured to herself. "It's for the family, it's for Dad. It's for the coffee shop." She took a deep breath and pushed the door. Central Cafe was everything that little Beans and Dreams was not. Modern, minimalist, full of executives talking on phones and typing on laptops. Alice felt like a fish out of water. Her eyes scanned the environment until they landed on a table in the corner. And there he was. John Blackstone was exactly as Penny had described, gorgeous in an almost unfair way. Dark hair perfectly styled, broad shoulders under a suit that probably cost more than Alice's rent, and a face that looked like it came out of a magazine. But there was something in his dark eyes, an expression of tiredness or perhaps boredom, that made him more human. He was alone, absent-mindedly stirring his coffee while reading something on his tablet. "Now or never," Alice whispered. She walked to the counter, ordered a simple coffee, and with her heart beating like a drum, walked toward the table next to his. Purposely, she stumbled. The coffee flew in a perfect arc, landing directly on John Blackstone's impeccable suit. "Oh my God!" Alice exclaimed, genuinely horrified. "I'm so sorry, I'm so clumsy." John stood up abruptly, looking at the dark stain spreading across the expensive fabric. For one terrible moment, Alice thought he was going to explode with anger. Instead, he looked into her eyes and smiled. "Well," he said, his deep voice with a hint of humor, "this isn't exactly the worst Wednesday morning I've ever had." Alice was paralyzed. He was even more attractive when he smiled. I can pay for the dry cleaning, or buy another suit. I mean, maybe not exactly the same because I imagine it's expensive, but—" "Breathe," he said gently, extending his hand. "John Blackstone." "Alice Romano," she replied automatically, shaking his hand. His skin was warm and surprisingly rough for someone who clearly worked in an office. "Italian? Third generation. My family has a coffee shop." "Ah, competition," he said, and there was definitely an amused glint in his eyes now. "Well, not exactly competition," Alice murmured, thinking of little Beans and Dreams compared to this sophisticated place. "Sit down," he said, indicating the chair across from him. "Let me at least meet the person responsible for ruining my favorite suit." Alice sat, still shocked that he was being so kind. "Mr. Blackstone, I really—" "John," he corrected. "And you were clearly nervous when you walked in here. Want to tell me why?" The question caught her off guard. There was something about the way he spoke, direct but not threatening, that made her want to be honest. "I need $350,000 in less than 48 hours, or I'm going to lose my family's coffee shop," she said, the words coming out in a torrent. John raised an eyebrow. "That's a very specific amount. My father's medical debts." They looked at each other in silence for a moment. Alice could see his neurons working, processing the information. "And you thought spilling coffee on me would be a good strategy to get the money?" he asked, and there was definitely humor in his voice now. Alice blushed violently. "No, I mean, maybe. I heard, a friend said—" She stopped, mortified. "This sounds even more ridiculous when I say it out loud." To her surprise, John laughed. A rich, genuine laugh. "You know what, Alice Romano? You're refreshing." "Refreshing?" "Most people who want something from me come with elaborate PowerPoint presentations or complex business proposals. You threw coffee on my clothes." Despite the whole situation, Alice felt her lips curve into a shy smile. "That wasn't exactly what I planned." "What did you plan?" The question left her speechless. She couldn't just say she was there to offer herself as a fake wife, could she? I was trying to find the courage to talk to you," she finally admitted. "About?" Alice took a deep breath. It was now or never. "About an agreement that could benefit both of us." John leaned forward, interested. "What kind of agreement?" "The kind that solves your corporate image problem and my financial problem." His eyes narrowed slightly, but not with anger, with curiosity. "Continue." "I know the board is pressuring you to get married, And I know you don't want a real marriage. Alice paused, trying to read his expression. I'm offering a temporary solution. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. John studied her intently, as if trying to decipher her. Interesting, he said finally. Very interesting. John Blackstone leaned back in his chair, studying Alice with the intensity of a man accustomed to making million-dollar decisions in minutes. The coffee stain on his shirt seemed forgotten as his dark eyes assessed her with newfound interest. A temporary solution, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. And what exactly would this solution entail, Miss Romano? Alice's heart hammered against her ribs. There was no turning back now. A marriage contract. 6 months, maybe a year. Long enough to satisfy your board and give you the stable image they want. Short enough that we both get our lives back. And in return, you pay off my father's debt. She lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Plus, compensation for my services. A smile tugged at the corner of John's mouth. Services? You make it sound very businesslike. Because it would be business, Alice said quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. Completely professional. Separate bedrooms, minimal public appearances, clean divorce papers when it's over. I see. John picked up his coffee cup, seemingly unbothered by the chaos their conversation had created. And what makes you think you're qualified for this particular position? The question stung more than it should have. Alice straightened her shoulders. I can be charming when I need to be. I know how to handle social situations, I'm presentable. And unlike the socialites you probably date, I have no interest in your money beyond what we agree upon. The socialites I date? John's eyebrow arched. You've been researching me. Basic background check, Alice admitted. Penny mentioned you've been linked to several prominent women, but nothing serious. Penny, your friend who works at my company. Penelope Chen, executive assistant to your VP of operations. John nodded slowly. Smart woman. Efficient. She's the one who told you about my predicament? She overheard you talking to your lawyer. Did she now? There was something dangerous in his tone that made Alice wonder if she'd just gotten her best friend fired. And she suggested you as a candidate? She suggested I talk to you. The rest was my idea. Brave. John set down his cup. Or desperate. Both, Alice said honestly. But I'm also serious. I need that money, Mr. Blackstone, and you need a wife. It's a simple transaction. John, he corrected again. And nothing involving marriage is ever simple, Miss Romano. Even fake ones. Alice. And it can be if we're both clear about expectations from the start. John was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Alice could practically hear the gears turning in his head, weighing pros and cons, calculating risks and benefits. My board meets next Thursday, he said finally. They've given me an ultimatum. Find a suitable wife within 6 months, or face a vote of no confidence. How long do you have? The clock started ticking 3 months ago. His jaw tightened. They're concerned about my playboy image affecting investor confidence. Apparently, a married CEO is seen as more stable, more trustworthy. And you disagree? I think it's archaic nonsense, but I also didn't build Blackstone Corporation to watch it crumble because of outdated prejudices. His eyes met hers. So yes, Alice Romano, I need a wife. The question is, are you really prepared to be her? The weight of what she was proposing suddenly hit her. This wasn't just about money or saving the coffee shop. She would have to live a lie, potentially for months. She'd have to convince not just his board, but the media, their families, their friends. I can do it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But I have conditions. John's smile returned, genuine this time. Of course you do. Name them. First, complete financial transparency. I want to know exactly how much you're willing to pay and when. Fair. What else? No physical intimacy. This is business only. Understood. Though we'll need to be convincing in public. Alice's stomach fluttered. Hand-holding, maybe a kiss on the cheek for cameras. Nothing more. Third condition? My father can never know the truth. He's been through enough heartbreak. If he thinks his daughter found love and happiness, maybe it'll help him heal. Something shifted in John's expression, a flicker of what might have been respect. Your father's health? Heart attack 6 months ago. The stress of losing Mom, then the medical bills. Alice's voice caught. He's getting better physically, but emotionally he blames himself for everything. If he knew I was doing this because of his debts, he'll never hear it from me, John said quietly. What else? When it's over, it's over. Clean break, no strings attached. We go back to our separate lives and pretend this never happened. Agreed. John pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyer draft a contract covering all of this. Can you meet tomorrow morning? Tomorrow? Alice's eyes widened. You're saying yes? Just like that? I'm saying I'm interested enough to explore the option. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly. He stood, tossing a 20 on the table. My office, 9 a.m. Bring identification and any financial documents related to your father's debt. Alice scrambled to her feet, her mind reeling. Mr. Black, John, wait. What if we can't stand each other? What if this is a disaster? John paused at her chair, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite herself. Then we'll be the most convincing, unhappily married couple in New York. That's not reassuring. Alice. His voice was gentler now, almost tender. You walked into a room full of strangers, threw coffee on a man you'd never met, and proposed a fake marriage to save your family's business. You're either incredibly brave or completely insane. Which do you think? I'm hoping for brave. He handed her a business card. Because insane would make this much more complicated. After he left, Alice sat in the empty cafe for another 20 minutes, staring at the elegant black card with its embossed silver lettering. John Blackstone, CEO, Blackstone Corporation. Below his name, someone had written in neat handwriting, tomorrow, 9 a.m., don't be late. Jay. Her phone buzzed. Penny. Well? Did you talk to him? I proposed, Alice said numbly. You what? Alice, I meant you should feel him out. Maybe mention you were looking for work, not... He said yes. He said maybe. We're meeting tomorrow to discuss terms. The silence on Penny's end stretched so long Alice wondered if the call had dropped. Penny? Holy shit, Alice. Holy actual shit. You're fired, aren't you? He knows you told me. I don't care if I'm fired. My best friend might marry the richest man in New York. Do you realize what this means? That I'm either about to save everything or destroy what's left of my life? That you're about to find out what you're really made of. That evening, Alice stood in her father's hospital room, watching him sleep. The machines beeped steadily, a metallic lullaby that had become the soundtrack to her life. At 62, Vincent Romano looked older, more fragile than she'd ever imagined possible. I might have found a solution, Papa, she whispered. It's crazy and probably stupid, but it might work. Just, please get better. Please be strong enough to see me happy, even if it's not real. Outside, snow began to fall against the hospital windows, and Alice wondered if she was about to make the best decision of her life or the worst mistake she'd ever imagined. Alice stood before the gleaming 40-story Blackstone Tower at 8:55 a.m., her stomach performing acrobatics that would make Cirque du Soleil jealous. She'd changed outfits 3 times that morning, finally settling on a charcoal gray dress that screamed, I'm professional but not trying too hard. The manila folder in her hands contained every financial document related to her father's debt, organized with the precision of someone who'd spent years managing a small business on a shoestring budget. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel, all clean lines and intimidating success. Alice felt like Dorothy stepping into the Emerald City, except instead of ruby slippers, she wore her only pair of good heels and a prayer that she wouldn't trip. Miss Romano? A woman in an impeccable black suit approached. I'm Sarah Mitchell, Mr. Blackstone's personal assistant. He's expecting you. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to another planet. Sarah made polite small talk about the weather, but Alice could barely focus over the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. John's office was exactly what she'd expected: enormous, intimidating, and designed to make visitors feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, while expensive art adorned the walls. Behind a desk the size of Alice's kitchen table sat John Blackstone, looking every inch the powerful CEO in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly income. "Alice. Right on time." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Coffee? Please." "Black. A woman after my own heart." He gestured to a seating area by the windows. "Shall we?" Two men were already waiting, one elderly gentleman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a younger man who looked like he'd stepped out of a legal drama. "Alice Romano, meet Henry Caldwell, my personal lawyer, and Robert Chen." "Penny's brother?" Alice interrupted, then immediately flushed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "Guilty as charged." Robert grinned. "Penny told me you two were college roommates. Small world." "Robert handles my public relations," John explained, settling into the chair across from Alice. "If we're going to convince the world we're madly in love, we'll need his expertise." Henry cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should begin with the financial arrangements?" Alice's hands tightened on her coffee cup. Here it was, the moment of truth. "Your debt totals $350,000, Henry continued, consulting his tablet. "Mr. Blackstone is prepared to pay this amount immediately upon contract signing, plus a monthly stipend of $25,000 for the duration of the arrangement." Alice nearly choked on her coffee. "25,000? Monthly?" "You'll have appearances, wardrobe requirements, social obligations," John said matter-of-factly. "Consider it compensation for your time and performance." "That's..." Alice did quick math in her head. "Even 6 months would be $150,000 plus the debt payment." It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. "That's very generous." "It's business," John replied, but there was something warmer in his eyes. "You're providing a valuable service." Henry slid a thick document across the coffee table. "The contract outlines all terms and conditions. 12-month maximum duration, with options for early termination by mutual consent. Public appearances as required, private lives remain separate. Confidentiality clauses, of course." Alice flipped through the pages, her eyes widening at the legal jargon. "This is thorough." "I don't do anything halfway," John said. "Take your time reading it." As Alice studied the contract, Robert leaned forward. "We'll need to establish your backstory. How you met, how long you've been dating, when John proposed." "I hadn't thought about that," Alice admitted. "Lucky for you I have," Robert grinned. "Coffee shop meet cute 6 months ago. John was a regular customer, you caught his eye. He finally worked up the courage to ask you out. Classic, believable, and it explains why you haven't been seen together publicly." "But people at Central Cafe saw us yesterday," Alice protested. "Perfect. Anyone who remembers will think it was romantic destiny, the powerful CEO returning to the place where he fell in love." John was watching Alice carefully. "Does the story work for you?" "It's actually kind of sweet," she said, surprising herself. "Much better than I threw coffee on him and proposed fake marriage." "We'll need to coordinate your public debut," Robert continued. "I suggest the Harrison Charity Gala next Friday. High-profile event, perfect photo opportunities, and it gives us a week to prepare." "Prepare how?" Alice asked. "Media training, wardrobe consultation, background rehearsal. You'll need to know John's preferences, his history, his business, anything a girlfriend of 6 months would reasonably know." The magnitude of what she was undertaking suddenly hit Alice like a freight train. This wasn't just about pretending to be married. She had to become someone else entirely. "What about my coffee shop?" she asked. "I can't just abandon it." "You'll keep running it," John said firmly. "That's part of your appeal, the hard-working, down-to-earth woman who captured the notorious bachelor's heart. Very humanizing for my image." Henry cleared his throat again. "Miss Romano, have you had a chance to review Section 7? The intimacy clauses?" Alice's cheeks burned as she found the relevant pages. Public displays of affection limited to hand-holding, brief kisses, and appropriate social contact. She read aloud. No cohabitation required, though occasional overnight stays for appearances may be necessary. Separate bedrooms always, John added quickly, and only when absolutely essential for maintaining the illusion. The press will be watching closely, Robert warned. Any signs that this isn't genuine and the whole thing falls apart. John's board isn't stupid. They'll be scrutinizing this relationship as much as the media. Alice looked up from the contract. And if they figure out it's fake? Then we're both in trouble, John said honestly. My career takes a hit, your financial situation remains unchanged, and we both look like frauds. No pressure, Alice muttered. There's something else, Henry said delicately. The prenuptial agreement. He produced another document, somehow even thicker than the first. In the unlikely event that feelings develop, and you decide to make this arrangement permanent, this protects both parties' interests. Alice stared at him. Feelings? It happens, Robert shrugged. Fake relationships that become real. We have to plan for every contingency. That won't be necessary, Alice said quickly. At the same time, John said, completely professional. They looked at each other, and for just a moment something electric passed between them. Alice felt her breath catch, and John's eyes darkened slightly before he looked away. Henry seemed amused. Nevertheless, the document exists should circumstances change. Alice turned back to the main contract, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. There's a morality clause? Standard provision, John explained. No public scandals, no behavior that could damage either party's reputation. Basically, don't make us look bad. And if I want out early, 30 days notice, return of any unused stipend money, and a confidentiality agreement that lasts forever, Henry replied. Same for Mr. Blackstone. Alice read through the contract twice more, asking questions, clarifying terms, making sure she understood every clause. Finally, she set it down and looked at John. This is really happening? Only if you sign, he said quietly. No one's forcing you, Alice. You can walk away right now, no questions asked. She thought about her father lying in that hospital bed, about the 3 generations of Romano family history that would die with the coffee shop, about the alternative future where she lost everything that mattered. Where do I sign? Henry produced an elegant gold pen. Multiple pages, I'm afraid. Initial here, here, and here. Full signature at the bottom. Alice's hand trembled slightly as she signed her name again and again. With each signature, she felt like she was stepping further from her old life and into something unknown and terrifying and thrilling all at once. When she finished, John signed his portions with swift, confident strokes. Congratulations, Henry said solemnly. You're officially engaged. Robert clapped his hands together. And now the real work begins. Alice, I hope you're ready to fall in love with John Blackstone. Alice looked at her new fiancé, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. Ready as I'll ever be, she said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. Outside the windows, Manhattan sparkled in the morning sun, and Alice wondered if she'd just signed her salvation or her doom. Absolutely not. Alice stared at her reflection in the boutique's 3-way mirror, horrified by the woman looking back at her. The stylist Robert had hired, a razor-thin woman named Vivian who spoke in designer labels, had somehow transformed her into a stranger wearing a dress that cost more than Alice's monthly rent. The Valentino is perfect for the gala, Vivian insisted, circling Alice like a predator. It says sophisticated without being ostentatious. Very, I landed a billionaire, but I'm still humble. Oh, it says I can't breathe, Alice muttered, tugging at the deep emerald silk that clung to curves she'd forgotten she had. And it's too much. I don't look like me. Darling, that's entirely the point. Vivian adjusted the neckline with surgical precision. You're not Alice Romano, small business owner. You're Alice Romano, future Mrs. John Blackstone. There's a difference. Alice caught sight of the price tag and nearly fainted. $12,000 for one dress? A steal, really. Oscar de la Renta wanted 15. The boutique's front door chimed, and Alice's heart did something acrobatic as John's voice carried across the space. How are we doing in here? Don't come in, Alice called out, suddenly panicked. It's not ready. But John was already pushing through the curtained area, stopping dead when he saw her. His eyes widened, traveling from her face down to her feet and back up in a way that made Alice's skin tingle. Jesus, he breathed. Bad? Alice asked, her voice small. No. His voice was rough. Definitely not bad. They stared at each other in the mirror, and Alice felt something shift in the air between them. The way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and surprising, made her forget about the ridiculous price tag and the fact that this was all pretend. The emerald brings out your eyes, he said softly, stepping closer. You look like a fraud in an expensive costume. Like the woman who's going to convince everyone that John Blackstone finally fell in love. Vivian clapped her hands together. Perfect. We'll take this one. Plus the navy cocktail dress, the cream suit, and the black evening gown. Oh, and shoes. I can't let you spend this much money on clothes, Alice protested, turning to John. It's insane. It's necessary, he replied, but his tone was gentle. Think of it as work clothes. You wouldn't expect a lawyer to buy their own law books, would you? Law books don't cost the same as a car. John smiled, that devastating smile that made her forget her own name. Alice, I spent more on my watch than this entire wardrobe. It's a business expense. Your watch costs more than... Alice trailed off, calculating, and then shook her head. Rich people are insane. Guilty as charged. He moved behind her, and Alice's breath caught as his hand settled lightly on her shoulders. In the mirror, they looked like a real couple, him tall and commanding in his dark suit, her elegant in silk that probably cost more than her college tuition. There's something else, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. We can't announce an engagement without this. Alice's heart stopped as he produced a small velvet box. John, you didn't open it. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in cream satin, was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. Not huge or ostentatious, but perfect. A classic solitaire with a diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the mirror. It's gorgeous, she whispered. But I can't. You can and you will. He took the ring from the box, lifting her left hand. May I? Alice nodded, not trusting her voice. The ring slid onto her finger like it belonged there, fitting perfectly. She stared at it, overwhelmed by how real it suddenly felt. How did you know my size? Lucky guess. His fingers lingered on hers. Do you like it? It's perfect. It's too perfect. She looked up at him in the mirror. John, this feels... real? He finished quietly. Terrifying. Before he could respond, Vivian bustled back in with an armload of accessories. Oh, the ring. Marvelous choice. Very classic. Very we're in love, but not gaudy about it. Now let's talk shoes. 2 hours later, Alice emerged from the boutique feeling like she'd been through a tornado. Her arms were full of shopping bags containing a wardrobe worth more than she'd earned in the past year, and the ring on her finger caught the afternoon sunlight like a beacon. Lunch? John suggested, falling into step beside her. We need to go over your backstory before the media training session. They found a quiet corner booth at a small Italian restaurant, Alice's choice, much to John's amusement. Let me guess, he said, scanning the menu. Your grandmother's recipes? Close. My great-grandmother's. Alice relaxed for the first time all day, surrounded by familiar scents of garlic and basil. She came over from Naples in 1952 with nothing but a suitcase and a notebook full of family recipes. And started the coffee shop? Not immediately. She worked in other people's restaurants for years, saving every penny. My great-grandfather was a carpenter. He built all the original fixtures when they finally opened Beans and Dreams in 1967. John leaned forward, genuinely interested. Tell me about your father. Alice's expression softened. Vincent Romeo. Yes, like Shakespeare, we've heard all the jokes. He's... He's the kindest man I've ever known. Never raised his voice, never met a stranger, would give you his last dollar if you needed it. Her voice caught. Which is probably how we ended up in this mess. The medical bills weren't his fault. No, but he kept helping other people even when we couldn't afford it. Free coffee for the homeless guy who sits outside our shop, catering jobs for cost when the local church needed fundraising, lending money to customers who were struggling. Alice smiled despite her sadness. Mom used to joke that he'd give away the whole business if she didn't watch him. Sounds like where you get your generous spirit. Alice looked up, surprised. I'm not generous. I'm desperate. Alice, you could have sold the shop, walked away, started fresh somewhere else. Instead, you're willing to fake marry a stranger to save a piece of family history. John's voice was serious. That's not desperation. That's love. Something warm unfurled in Alice's chest at his words. What about your family? The contract didn't mention them. John's expression shuddered slightly. There isn't much to mention. My parents died when I was 16. Car accident. I was raised by my grandfather until I turned 18. I'm sorry. That must have been... It was a long time ago. He signaled the waiter for the check. The important thing is that there's no one to fool except the board and the public. Alice sensed there was more to the story, but something in John's posture warned her not to push. Instead, she pulled out a notebook. So what do I need to know about you, besides your tragic orphan backstory? John's mouth quirked. Tragic orphan? You make me sound like Batman. Are you? Because that would explain the mysteriously vast wealth. Just good investments and questionable morals. He was smiling now, the shadow lifted. Let's see. I drink my coffee black, I hate seafood, I went to Harvard Business School, and I have an embarrassing weakness for old movies. What kind of old movies? The kind where the guy gets the girl in the end and everyone lives happily ever after. Alice stared at him. You're kidding. Dead serious, give me Casablanca or Roman Holiday over any modern blockbuster. That's unexpectedly romantic for a ruthless corporate shark. Who says I'm ruthless? Your reputation, the business magazines, that article in Forbes that called you the Ice Prince of Wall Street. John winced. That was particularly unflattering, though I admit I've cultivated the image. It's useful in negotiations. But it's not really you. He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. I'm beginning to think you see things other people miss, Alice Romano. The waiter brought the check and John left a tip that was probably more than Alice spent on groceries in a month. As they prepared to leave, he caught her hand. We should practice, he said quietly. Practice what? Instead of answering, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, just above the engagement ring. The gesture was simple, almost old-fashioned, but it sent electricity shooting up Alice's arm. Being a couple, he said, his eyes locked on hers. We need to look natural together. Alice's heart hammered against her ribs. That felt pretty natural. Did it? There was something vulnerable in his voice, something that made Alice wonder if he was as affected by their pretend intimacy as she was. Too natural, she admitted quietly. They walked back to his car in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As John held the door open for her, Alice caught sight of their reflection in the window, her in her beautiful new dress, him impossibly handsome in the afternoon light, the diamond sparkling on her finger. They looked perfect together. They looked happy. They looked real. And that, Alice realized as they drove through the busy streets of Manhattan, was exactly the problem. Alice stared at herself in the full-length mirror of John's penthouse, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The emerald Valentino dress hugged her curves like it had been painted on. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo that had taken the stylist 2 hours to perfect, and the diamond engagement ring caught the light with every breath she took. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. John's amused voice came from behind her. She turned to find him adjusting his bow tie, devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. The sight of him made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with nerves about the evening ahead. I feel like I am, she admitted. What if I say something wrong? What if someone asks a question I can't answer? What if... Alice. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. Breathe. Easy for you to say. You were born into this world. I make coffee for a living. You make excellent coffee, he said with a small smile, and you survived 3 days of Robert's media training without strangling him, which frankly makes you a saint. Despite her nerves, Alice laughed. Robert had been relentless in his preparation, drilling her on everything from John's favorite childhood pet, a golden retriever named Gatsby, to his college roommate's name, Michael Harrison, who coincidentally was hosting tonight's charity gala. Besides, John continued, his thumbs stroking gently across her knuckles, all you have to do is be yourself. The woman who walked into my office and proposed the most outrageous business deal I'd ever heard. That woman was desperate and slightly unhinged. That woman was brave and brilliant. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. And she's about to knock every person in that ballroom completely off their feet. Alice felt heat rise in her cheeks. You don't have to say things like that when we're alone. Who says I'm saying it for the act? The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Alice searched his eyes, looking for some sign that he was still playing a part, but what she saw there made her breath catch. The intercom buzzed, breaking the spell. Mr. Blackstone, your car is ready. Showtime, John murmured, but he didn't immediately step away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. One last thing. Alice's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a pair of diamond earrings that probably cost more than her apartment. John, I can't... They were my grandmother's, he said quietly. She left them to me before she died. Said I should give them to someone special when the time was right. But this isn't real. Tonight it is. He took one of the earrings, his fingers gentle as he fastened it to her earlobe. Tonight we're John and Alice, completely in love and about to announce our engagement to the world. His touch sent shivers down her spine as he secured the second earring. When he finished, he stepped back to admire his work, and Alice caught sight of them in the mirror. Her in emerald silk and diamonds, him dark and commanding beside her. They looked like they belonged together. Perfect, he said softly. The ride to the Plaza Hotel was a blur of city lights and nervous energy. John seemed completely at ease, occasionally pointing out landmarks or making casual conversation, while Alice tried not to hyperventilate in the leather seat beside him. Remember, he said as they pulled up to the red carpet, we've been together 6 months. We're head over heels in love. And we're announcing our engagement tonight because we can't wait another moment to share our happiness with the world. Alice nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Through the tinted windows, she could see camera flashes already going off as other guests arrived. Alice, John's hand found hers. Look at me. She turned, and he was closer than she'd expected, his dark eyes serious. Whatever happens in there, we're a team. You and me against the world, okay? Okay, she whispered. And Alice? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're going to be amazing. The car door opened, and suddenly they were stepping out into a symphony of camera clicks and shouted questions. Alice's instinct was to freeze, but John's arm slipped around her waist, warm and steady, guiding her forward. John, who's the mystery woman? Is it true you're off the market? Miss, what's your name? John leaned down to whisper in her ear, and to anyone watching it would look intimate and romantic. Just smile and keep walking. Don't answer anything yet. They made it through the gauntlet of photographers and into the hotel lobby, where Alice finally felt like she could breathe again. That wasn't so bad, John said, squeezing her hand. Speak for yourself. I think I'm blind from all the flashes. It gets easier, he promised. Come on, let's go find our host. The ballroom was a glittering wonderland of New York's elite. Alice recognized faces from magazines and news programs, all of them dripping in jewelry and designer gowns that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. John, a booming voice called out, and a tall man with silver hair approached them with arms outstretched. There's the man of the hour. Michael, John smiled, embracing his friend. Thanks for hosting this circus. My pleasure. And this must be the mysterious woman who's finally tamed the infamous John Blackstone. Michael turned to Alice with twinkling eyes. I'm Michael Harrison, and I've been waiting years to meet the woman brave enough to take on this stubborn bastard. Alice Romano, she replied, accepting his offered hand. And he's not that stubborn, just selective. Michael laughed delightedly. Oh, I like her already. John, you've outdone yourself. I know, John said, his arm tightening around Alice's waist. I'm the luckiest man alive. The way he said it with such conviction and warmth made Alice's heart skip. For a moment she almost believed he meant it. Well, you can't keep her to yourself all evening, Michael declared. People are dying to meet her. But first, he signaled to a waiter carrying champagne. A toast to John and Alice. Before Alice knew it, they were surrounded by a crowd of well-wishers, all wanting to congratulate them and get a closer look at the woman who'd captured John Blackstone's heart. Alice found herself answering questions about how they met, how long they'd been dating, and when they'd known it was love. It was actually our second date, she found herself saying to a group of fascinated socialites. We were walking through Central Park, and it started to rain. John gave me his jacket, and I looked at him and thought, this is the man I'm going to marry. It was a complete fabrication, but the women sighed appreciatively, and Alice caught John looking at her with something like admiration. How romantic, one woman exclaimed. And when did he propose? 3 days ago, John interjected smoothly, his hand finding Alice's. I couldn't wait any longer. When you know, you know. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her ring finger, right above the diamond. The gesture was so tender, so convincing that Alice felt tears prick her eyes. Oh my goodness, look at that ring, another woman gasped. It's gorgeous. It belonged to my grandmother, John said, never taking his eyes off Alice. I've been saving it for the right woman. The crowd dissolved into appreciative murmurs, but Alice barely heard them. She was lost in John's gaze, in the way he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. You two are absolutely glowing, someone commented. I can practically see the love radiating from you. Alice felt her cheeks warm, but before she could respond, the lights dimmed, and Michael's voice came over the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. As Michael began his welcome speech, John leaned down to whisper in Alice's ear again. You're a natural at this, he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. I'm terrifying myself, she whispered back. Why? Alice turned her head slightly, bringing her lips dangerously close to his ear. Because I'm starting to believe it too. For a moment, John went very still. When she pulled back to look at him, something had shifted in his expression, something heated and uncertain and completely real. Alice, he started to say, but Michael's voice boomed over the microphone again. Before we begin tonight's program, I have a very special announcement to make. My dear friend John Blackstone is here tonight with his lovely fiancée Alice Romano, and they've just gotten engaged. The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers. Champagne glasses clinked around them, and suddenly Alice and John were being pushed toward the stage. This wasn't part of the plan, Alice hissed as they climbed the steps. Roll with it, John murmured back, his hand steady on her back. Michael handed John the microphone with a grin. Say a few words. John looked out at the crowd, then down at Alice beside him. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. I wasn't planning to make speeches tonight, he began. But since Mike has put us on the spot, the crowd chuckled. I just want to say that meeting Alice changed my life in ways I never expected. She walked into my world and turned everything upside down, and I couldn't be happier about it. He turned to look at her, and Alice's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. Alice Romano, you are brave, beautiful, brilliant, and completely impossible. And I love you for all of it. The last words were spoken so quietly that only she could hear them, but they hit her like a physical blow. Because the way he said them, the way he was looking at her, it didn't sound like acting at all. Alice woke up in a bed that wasn't hers, wearing a silk nightgown she didn't remember putting on. with the taste of champagne still lingering on her tongue, and a diamond ring catching the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment she lay perfectly still, trying to piece together how she'd ended up in what was clearly the guest room of John's penthouse. The last clear memory she had was of his voice saying, "I love you for all of it," in front of 300 of New York's most influential people. Everything after that was a blur of congratulations, dancing, and far too much champagne. A soft knock on the door interrupted her panic spiral. "Alice, are you awake?" John's voice, careful and uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. "Come in," she called, pulling the covers up to her chin. He appeared in the doorway holding a cup of coffee, his hair slightly mussed and still wearing his tuxedo pants and white dress shirt from the night before, though the bow tie was gone and the top buttons were undone. He looked rumpled and gorgeous, and completely unlike the polished CEO she'd grown accustomed to. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the coffee on the nightstand beside her. "Like I got hit by a truck made of Dom Perignon." Alice struggled to sit up, wincing at the pounding in her head. "Please tell me I didn't make a complete fool of myself last night." John's expression was unreadable. "You don't remember?" "I remember the speech and dancing and then—" She trailed off, fragments of memory surfacing, laughing at something Michael had said. John's hands on her waist as they swayed to the orchestra. The way he'd looked at her when they'd slow danced to "The Way You Look Tonight." And then, hazier but more intense, stumbling back to his apartment, his arm around her waist to keep her steady. Him carefully removing her earrings, his grandmother's earrings, and setting them safely in their box. The gentle way he'd brushed her hair back from her face. "Oh God," she whispered, mortified. Did we?" "No," John said quickly. "Nothing happened. You were exhausted and a little drunk, so I brought you here. You were asleep before your head hit the pillow." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "I slept in my office." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something that felt disappointingly like regret. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking care of me. Alice, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach clench with anxiety. "About what?" Instead of answering, John walked to the window, staring out at the city below with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The morning light highlighted the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw. "The Times wants to do a feature on us," he said finally. "Robert's already fielding calls from 3 major magazines. Our engagement announcement made the society pages of every newspaper in the city." "That's good, right? Isn't that what we wanted?" John turned to face her, and Alice was startled by the conflict in his dark eyes. "Is it what you wanted, Alice? I don't understand." "Last night." He moved closer to the bed, his voice dropping lower. "When you said you were starting to believe it too. What did you mean?" Alice's cheeks burned. She'd hoped he hadn't heard that, or that the champagne had made her forget she'd said it. "I was just getting caught up in the moment, playing the part." "Were you?" The simple question hung between them, loaded with possibilities that terrified her. Alice looked down at her hands, at the ring that had felt so natural on her finger that she'd forgotten it was supposed to be fake. "John, we have an agreement." "Fuck the agreement." Alice's head snapped up, shocked by the raw emotion in his voice. "Do you think I planned this?" he asked, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "Do you think I wanted to complicate everything by—" He stopped, shaking his head. "By what?" "By falling for you." The words came out quietly, like a confession. "By wanting this to be real." Alice's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" John reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "Alice, I've spent the last week trying to convince myself that what I'm feeling is just good acting. But last night, when I was holding you, dancing with you, watching you charm everyone in that ballroom—" His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Alice's breath caught. "I realized I haven't been acting at all." The admission hung between them like a live wire. Alice stared into his eyes, searching for some sign that this was another performance, another part of their elaborate charade. But what she saw there was completely, devastatingly real. "This is crazy," she whispered. "We barely know each other. I know you put extra foam in Mrs. Patterson's cappuccino because it makes her smile. I know you worry about your father so much you can't sleep. I know you're brave enough to save your family's legacy by proposing to a complete stranger, and stubborn enough to argue with me about the price of a dress." His hand cupped her cheek. "I know you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me." Tears pricked Alice's eyes. "John, tell me I'm not alone in this," he said quietly. "Tell me you feel it too." Alice closed her eyes, trying to think rationally, trying to remember all the reasons this was impossible. But all she could think about was the way he'd looked at her when she'd walked out in that emerald dress, the tenderness in his voice when he'd told her about his grandmother's earrings, the way her heart had raced every time he'd touched her, even the innocent touches meant for show. "I'm terrified," she admitted, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Of me? Of this? Of wanting something I can't have? Who says you can't have it? Reality? Our contract? The fact that we're from completely different worlds?" Alice's voice cracked. "You're John Blackstone. I make coffee for a living. And I'm falling in love with the woman who makes coffee for a living," he said simply. "The woman who threw coffee on my shirt and changed my entire life." Before Alice could respond, before she could think of all the reasons why this was impossible, John leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't the careful public kiss they'd practiced for appearances. It was soft and desperate and completely real, tasting of hope and champagne, and the promise of something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, Alice was breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We can't," she whispered against his lips. "We are," he murmured back, his forehead resting against hers. Alice's phone buzzed insistently from the nightstand, shattering the moment. She glanced at the screen and her blood ran cold. "It's the hospital," she said, panic flooding her voice. "It's about my father." John immediately stepped back, his expression shifting to concern. "Answer it." Alice grabbed the phone with trembling hands. "Hello? Miss Romano? This is Dr. Martinez from Mount Sinai. I'm calling about your father. Is he okay?" Alice's voice was barely a whisper. "He's stable, but he had another episode last night. We need you to come in as soon as possible." The phone slipped from Alice's numb fingers. John caught it before it could hit the floor. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, he told the doctor crisply, then hung up and immediately began pulling clothes from the closet. "Get dressed. I'm driving you." "John, you don't have to." "Like hell I don't." He handed her a simple dress and cardigan. "Your father needs you, and you need me. That's what partners do." Partners. Not fake fiancés or business associates. Partners. Alice looked at him. This man who'd gone from stranger to fake fiancé to something infinitely more complicated in the span of a week. And felt her heart crack open completely. Maybe she was falling too. Maybe she'd been falling since that first moment in the cafe when he'd smiled at her instead of getting angry about his ruined suit. Maybe some fairy tales were worth the risk. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's go." As they rushed toward the door, John caught her hand, squeezing gently. "Whatever happens," he said, "we'll face it together. I promise." And for the first time since this whole crazy adventure began, Alice allowed herself to believe that some promises were meant to be kept. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai's cardiac wing were a harsh contrast to the soft morning light of John's penthouse. Alice sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside her father's room, still wearing yesterday's makeup and the simple dress John had handed her in his rush to get her here. Vincent Romano looked smaller than she remembered, dwarfed by the hospital bed and the maze of wires connecting him to various monitors. But his eyes were alert when he spotted Alice in the doorway, and his face lit up with the same warm smile that had welcomed customers to Beans and Dreams for 30 years. "Mia Bambina," he said softly, reaching out his hand. "You came so fast." Alice rushed to his side, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment as she took his hand. Of course I came, Papa. How are you feeling? Better now that you're here. Vincent's gaze moved past Alice to where John stood quietly by the door. And who is this handsome young man? You didn't tell me you were bringing someone. Alice's heart clenched. In all the panic and rush to get to the hospital, she'd forgotten that her father knew nothing about John, about their engagement, about any of it. The ring felt suddenly heavy on her finger. Papa, this is... She turned to look at John, who was watching the interaction with gentle eyes. This is John. John. Vincent's face brightened even more. The customer you mentioned. The one who comes to the cafe every morning for black coffee and reads the financial section. Alice blinked in surprise. She'd never told her father about any customer fitting that description. But before she could correct him, John stepped forward. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Romano, he said, extending his hand. Alice talks about you constantly. Does she now? Vincent shook John's hand with surprising strength. And what do you do, John? I work in investments, John replied smoothly. Nothing as important as what you do, though. Alice tells me you make the best cappuccino in Manhattan. Vincent laughed, a sound that made Alice's heart soar. She hadn't heard her father laugh in months. She's biased, but I'll take the compliment. Sit, both of you. John pulled up another plastic chair, positioning it close enough to Alice that their knees almost touched. The gesture was subtle but somehow incredibly intimate in the sterile hospital room. So, John, Vincent said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, are you here as Alice's friend, or is there something more I should know about? Alice's cheeks flamed. Papa, it's okay, John said quietly, reaching over to take Alice's hand. Mr. Romano, I'm here as someone who cares very deeply about your daughter. Vincent's expression grew more serious as he studied their joined hands. His eyes stopped on the diamond ring, and Alice saw the exact moment he understood. Madonna mia, he breathed. Alice, is this? We're engaged, Papa, Alice said, the words coming out in a rush. It happened very recently. I wanted to tell you in person, but then you got sick and... Engaged? Vincent struggled to sit up straighter, his eyes filling with tears. My little girl is getting married. Papa, please don't get excited. Dr. Martinez said, Dr. Martinez can go to hell, Vincent said with more energy than Alice had seen from him in weeks. My daughter is engaged to a nice young man who looks at her like she hung the stars in the sky. This is the best medicine I could ask for. Alice glanced at John, who was indeed looking at her with an expression so tender, it made her chest ache. How long have you known? Vincent asked, grasping both their hands in his. When did you fall in love? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Alice opened her mouth, ready to recite the story Robert had crafted about coffee shops and chance encounters. But John spoke first. The moment she walked into my life and turned everything upside down, he said simply. I'd been sleepwalking through my days until I met Alice. She woke me up. The words were part of their rehearsed story, but the way John said them, like he was confessing something sacred, made Alice's breath catch. Vincent beamed. And you, Mia Cara. When did you know? Alice looked at John, at this man who'd dropped everything to drive her to the hospital, who was holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, who was charming her father with such genuine warmth that she could almost forget this had all started as a business arrangement. When he showed me who he really was, she said softly, underneath all the walls and pretenses, when I realized he has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. Something flickered in John's eyes, surprise maybe, or hope. A nurse appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are almost over. Mr. Romano needs his rest. Of course, John said, immediately standing. It was wonderful to meet you, sir. The pleasure was mine. Vincent gripped John's hand again. You take care of my daughter, you understand? With my life, John replied, and the conviction in his voice made Alice's eyes water. They were almost to the elevator when Alice heard her father calling her name. She turned to see him gesturing for her to come back. Go ahead, John said. I'll wait for you downstairs. Alice returned to her father's bedside. Vincent was studying her with the sharp eyes that had always been able to see right through her childhood fibs and teenage excuses. "He loves you," Vincent said without preamble. "That boy is head over heels in love with you. Papa, and you love him too, even if you're too scared to admit it." Vincent reached up to cup Alice's cheek. "Cara mia, I've been watching people fall in love in my cafe for 30 years. I know what it looks like." Alice felt tears threatening. "It's complicated. The best love stories usually are." Vincent smiled. "Your mother and we met when she was engaged to someone else. Did I ever tell you that?" Alice shook her head, surprised. "Rich businessman, very proper, very boring. Her parents loved him." Vincent's eyes grew distant with memory. But when she looked at him, there was no spark, no fire. When she looked at me, he chuckled. "Madonna, I thought she was going to set the whole neighborhood on fire." "What happened?" "She broke off the engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. Caused a huge scandal. Her family didn't speak to her for 2 years." Vincent's expression grew tender. "But we had 40 beautiful years together before the cancer took her. 40 years of love and laughter and the best espresso in Little Italy." Alice wiped at her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see the same fire in your eyes when you look at John, and life is too short to waste time being scared of happiness." Vincent squeezed her hand. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll fight for this. For him. For the love you're both pretending isn't real." Alice's heart clenched. Her father could always see too much. "How did you know we were pretending?" Vincent smiled. "Because you forgot to take off your engagement ring before you came in, but you've been twisting it nervously like it doesn't belong there. And because John introduced himself to me like a stranger, but then knew exactly how I take my coffee." His eyes twinkled. "Plus, no one falls in love and gets engaged without telling their papa unless something unusual is going on." Alice stared at him, caught between embarrassment and admiration. "And you're not angry?" "Angry? My daughter found a way to save our family business and maybe found the love of her life in the process? I'm proud of you, Bambina. But now you need to decide what you really want." "What do you mean?" Vincent nodded toward the door where John had disappeared. "That man didn't drive you here at dawn because of some business arrangement. He didn't charm an old man in a hospital bed because he was getting paid to do it. And he certainly didn't look at you like you were his whole world because it was part of an act." Alice felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Papa, I'm so scared." "Of course you are. Love is terrifying. But you know what's more terrifying?" Vincent's voice grew serious. "Spending your life wondering what if. Don't be like your old papa, Mia Cara. Don't wait for tomorrow to tell someone you love them. Tomorrow isn't promised to any of us." Alice kissed her father's forehead, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Get some rest, okay? I'll be back tomorrow." "Bring John," Vincent called after her. "I want to hear more about his investment work. Maybe he can give an old man some financial advice." Alice laughed, despite her tears. Even from a hospital bed, her father was matchmaking. She found John in the hospital lobby, pacing by the windows with his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, he quickly ended his call. "Everything okay?" he asked, searching her face. "He likes you," Alice said simply. Relief flooded John's expression. "Good. I like him too. He's exactly like you described." They walked to the parking garage in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were in John's car that Alice finally spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming with me, for being so kind to him. You didn't have to do any of that." John started the engine but didn't immediately put the car in drive. Instead, he turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Alice, what your father said back there, about me looking at you like you hung the stars." He paused, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't wrong. Alice's heart stopped. "John, I meant what I said this morning. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have." His voice was quiet but steady. "And I need you to know that everything I just did, everything I said to your father, none of it was an act. Alice stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. We agreed this was business. Screw what we agreed. John reached over to cup her face gently. I'm in love with you, Alice Romano. Completely irrevocably no going back in love with you. Before Alice could respond, before she could think of all the reasons why this was impossible, John kissed her again. And this time, she didn't hold back. 6 months later, Alice stood in the same boutique where this whole adventure had begun. But this time, she was shopping for a very different kind of dress. The wedding gown she'd chosen was nothing like the elaborate confection she'd expected to wear for a fake marriage. Instead, it was simple and elegant, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves, the kind of dress meant for a real bride marrying the love of her life. You look radiant, Vivian said, pinning the final alterations. Absolutely glowing with happiness. Alice smiled at her reflection, barely recognizing the confident, joyful woman looking back at her. So much had changed since that desperate morning when she'd walked into Central Cafe and thrown coffee on John Blackstone's suit. Ms. Romano? The boutique assistant appeared with a small wrapped box. This just arrived for you. The delivery man said it was urgent. Alice recognized John's handwriting immediately. Inside the box was a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny coffee cup. The note tucked beneath it made her eyes water. For the woman who changed my life with a perfectly timed accident. I love you more every day. See you at the altar. Jay. Her phone buzzed with a text from Penny. Stop crying. You'll ruin your makeup. The car will be there in 20 minutes. Alice laughed, wiping her eyes carefully. Penelope had thrown herself into wedding planning with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time, insisting that her best friend deserved the most perfect day possible. Even if you two are disgustingly happy already, Penny had grumbled while arranging flowers. Some of us are still single and bitter, you know. The real turning point had come 3 months ago, when John had walked into a board meeting and announced that he was dissolving their original contract. Alice had panicked, thinking he'd changed his mind about everything until he'd gotten down on one knee in front of the entire Blackstone Corporation board of directors and proposed for real. Alice Romano, he'd said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Will you marry me? Not for business, not for image, but because I can't imagine spending another day of my life without you. The board had erupted in applause when she'd said yes. Apparently, they'd all figured out months ago that their CEO was genuinely head over heels in love. Robert Chen had later confessed that the emergency board meeting had actually been John's elaborate plan to propose somewhere meaningful to their relationship. Manipulative and romantic, Alice had accused John later. A dangerous combination. You love it, he'd replied, kissing her until she forgot to be indignant. Now as Alice made her way to the small church in Little Italy, where her parents had been married 41 years ago, her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Vincent was waiting by the car, looking distinguished in his rented tuxedo, and healthy in a way that still made Alice want to cry with relief. The experimental treatment John had quietly arranged and paid for had worked better than anyone had dared hope. You look beautiful, Bambina, Vincent said, offering her his arm. Just like your mother on our wedding day. Are you sure you're strong enough to walk me down the aisle? Alice fretted. Try and stop me, Vincent replied firmly. I've been practicing for weeks. Dr. Martinez says I have the heart of a man 20 years younger. Must be all that happiness, Alice teased. And John's vitamins. Vincent chuckled. Over the past 6 months, John had become the son Vincent had never had, spending hours at the hospital during the worst days, learning to make espresso properly, and listening to endless stories about the old neighborhood. In return, Vincent had taught John Italian curse words, shown him how to read people's coffee preferences, and given him the kind of unconditional paternal love John had been missing since he was 16. He's good for you, Vincent said as they approached the church. And you're good for him. I see how he looks at you, like you're a miracle he can't quite believe is real. Through the church doors, Alice could see the small gathering of family and friends waiting inside. John had wanted something intimate, and Alice had agreed. After months of public scrutiny and society events, they both craved something private and genuine. As the organist began the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon, Alice saw John at the altar and forgot how to breathe. He was devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, but it was the expression on his face when he saw her that made her knees weak. Pure joy, wonder, and a love so complete it took her breath away. They'd written their own vows, despite Robert's protests that traditional was safer. But Alice had something to say to John that couldn't be found in any standard ceremony. When they reached the altar, Vincent kissed Alice's cheek and placed her hand in John's with a whispered, "Take care of my heart. Always," John promised, his eyes never leaving Alice's face. The ceremony passed in a blur of happy tears and laughter. Michael Harrison served as best man, telling anyone who would listen that he'd known from the moment he met Alice that his friend was a goner. Penny stood as maid of honor, dabbing at her eyes and muttering about how sickeningly perfect they were together. But when it came time for vows, the church fell silent. "Alice," John began, his voice rough with emotion, "6 months ago you walked into my life and accused me of needing a wife. You were right, but not for the reasons either of us thought. I didn't need a wife for my image or my board or my company. I needed you, specifically you, to show me what it meant to really live." Alice felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "You taught me that love isn't a business transaction or a carefully negotiated contract. It's messy and terrifying and completely irrational, and it's the most important thing we'll ever do. I promise to love you with the same courage you showed when you threw coffee on my shirt and changed everything." When it was Alice's turn, she took a shaky breath. "John, when I proposed our fake engagement, I thought I was saving my family's business. What I was really doing was saving myself. You saw past every wall I'd built, every fear I'd hidden behind, and you loved me anyway." Her voice grew stronger. "I promise to be brave enough to love you completely, to trust in us even when it's scary, and to remind you every day that the man I fell in love with isn't the CEO or the billionaire or the ice prince of Wall Street. He's the man who drives me to the hospital at dawn and learns to make cappuccino to impress my father." There wasn't a dry eye in the church by the time they exchanged rings. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, John's kiss was soft and sweet and full of promises for their future. As they walked back down the aisle together, Alice caught sight of the newspaper photographer Robert had allowed inside. Tomorrow, the society pages would announce that the business arrangement had become the love story of the year. But Alice didn't care about the headlines or the photos or the public fascination with their romance. All she cared about was the man beside her, the ring on her finger, and the life they were going to build together. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Beans and Dreams, illuminating the familiar bustle of the breakfast rush. Alice smiled as she watched her father teach 3-year-old Emma Blackstone how to steam milk properly, both of them wearing matching aprons that read, "Romano Family Recipes." "Careful, Nonno," Emma said seriously, her dark eyes so much like her father's focused intently on the espresso machine. "Papa says the milk is very hot." "Your papa is very smart," Vincent agreed, guiding her small hands. "Just like your mama." Alice felt familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind. "She's going to be running this place by the time she's 5, John murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "God help us all," Alice laughed, leaning back against her husband's chest. "A Romano Blackstone combination? She'll probably own half of Manhattan by the time she graduates college." They'd bought the building housing Beans and Dreams 2 years ago, expanding it to include a small bookshop and a community space where local artists displayed their work. John had insisted it was a sound investment, but Alice knew he just wanted to make sure her family's legacy was secure forever. The original Blackstone Corporation still thrived under John's leadership, but he'd learned to delegate more, making time for the things that really mattered: lazy Sunday mornings, Emma's bedtime stories, and helping Alice with the evening rush when she was too pregnant to be on her feet all day. Alice placed her hand on her growing belly, where baby number 2 was making their presence known with increasingly energetic kicks. "How are you feeling?" John asked, his hand covering hers. "Like I'm incubating a future soccer player," Alice replied. This one's definitely going to be more active than Emma was. Takes after their mother then, always stirring up trouble. Alice turned in his arms, smiling up at the man who'd become her whole world. I seem to remember you enjoying the trouble I stirred up. Best business proposal I ever received, John said, kissing her forehead. Even if you did ruin my favorite suit. And look how well it worked out for both of us. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma ran over, arms outstretched. Mama! Papa! Look what Nono taught me. She proudly displayed a child-sized cappuccino cup filled with perfectly steamed milk, complete with a heart design in the foam. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Alice said, crouching down to Emma's level. You're going to be even better at this than Mama someday. Will the baby like coffee too? Emma asked, patting Alice's belly gently. We'll have to wait and see, John said, lifting his daughter into his arms. But I have a feeling this little one is going to love everything about our family business. Alice watched her husband and daughter, her heart so full of love, she wondered how one person could contain so much happiness. The original contract that had brought them together was long since dissolved, replaced by something infinitely more valuable, a real partnership built on love, trust, and the occasional perfectly timed accident. Outside, the streets of Little Italy buzzed with afternoon activity. Inside Beans and Dreams, 3 generations of Romanos worked side by side with the newest Blackstones, creating something beautiful from the simplest ingredients: good coffee, family recipes, and love that was strong enough to last forever. Alice had thought she was saving her family's business when she'd walked into that cafe 6 years ago. What she'd actually done was save herself, find her soulmate, and create a love story worth writing about. And if that wasn't a happy ending worth fighting for, she didn't know what was.